As the now 15th entry in the Xeno meta series, depending on how exactly you count each, Xenoblade Genesis has a lot of different plot threads woven throughout the last almost 30 years that it's able to pick up on in order to further the overall narrative. This video will be me going through as many as my tiny little mind can remember and the current state of them going into this latest adventure. Just a reminder, Xeno as a series doesn't really do direct sequels outside of the Xenosaga trilogy, with even the most directly linked entries choosing to tell their own story that serves that game first and foremost. So while this video will talk a lot about collective lore built up since Xenogears in 1998, odds are maybe 10% of it will be relevant to the main overall plot of Genesis. Still, each game does further the overall narrative in interesting ways, and what's been happening in recent entries has heavily tied everything together in a way that makes it seem like Genesis will help usher the series into its next main phase. So let's go over what's been coming to a head. In order to prepare for Genesis, we'll be going over the lore, the info we have from the trailer, and the setup we have from previous games. I'll also be introducing spoilers at a staggered rate throughout this video, starting with the numbered trilogy, then introducing spoilers from X, and then going into Saga. That way, if you've only experienced part of the whole series, you can click off at that point. I should say though, if you're in the X section, the trilogy spoilers are free reign, and in the Saga sections you will get all spoilers, mainly because so many of the points I need to make are relevant to multiple games. I'll also be arranging this video like a mini-series recap, minus whatever gets fully resolved in each game. So this won't be like a recap of what happens in each game's main plot. I figure if you want that, you should just play the games. I also won't be bringing Gears into the mix for this video due to its non-canonicity, but there is so much to be pulled from that game's ideas and scrapped sequel that it could make for a whole nother video altogether, so let me know if you want to see that too. With all that out of the way, let's start going over the Xeno lore. Spoilers ahead for the numbered Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. Xeno's cosmology has been built up across every entry in this storied meta series and has stayed consistent throughout all of them. So although the mapping of everything isn't fully explained outside of the Xenosaga trilogy, it is still the same everywhere, so let's start with some basic lore that is important to all parts of this franchise. Xeno's multiverse is broken up into two parts, or realms, being the upper and lower domain. Each universe we get to see in the games is a part of the lower domain, and the upper domain you can kind of think of as like this higher dimensional room that they're all stored in. If I were to compare it to any other piece of media, I'd choose Edwin Abbott's classic Flatland, where you have this two-dimensional world that comes into contact with a three-dimensional being. The entire world that book takes place in is akin to just a piece of paper with drawings on it, but this 3D being, a sphere, is above it and can interact with it at multiple points. Each universe in Xeno you can think of as like a piece of paper or even a book in this library of the upper domain, and there are higher dimensional residents of that room, although none of them are relevant to the events of each book's story. I bring up this higher dimension because in every universe within the Xeno multiverse, as far as we know, there's a singular point where the upper and lower domains meet physically, and it manifests within each universe as a large monolithic object. In the Xenoblade series, it's called the Conduit, and in the Xenosaga and Xenogears series, it gets called the Zohar, so if you hear me use each term, I'm just referring to the same thing. The Conduit, since it's a literal gateway point to a higher dimension, is a source of infinite power and energy, and as such could even be used as kind of like a super battery or power source. In the mainline Xenoblade numbered trilogy universe, humans unearth the Conduit in the early 21st century, and it quickly launches technology centuries further than in our universe due to the implications. Two of the main scientists working on the Conduit at this time are named Klaus and Galea, and they along with their team develop some crazy tech, the basis of which is consistent among all Conduit technology in the series. I'll be sorting this tech into two groups, which I'll call processors and emulators. A processor uses power directly from the Conduit and the upper domain to do something, and an emulator uses technology to recreate that power source, emulating the Conduit's energies and powers. Now, emulators aren't super important outside of Xenosaga, but the big processor technology that the team builds here is called the Trinity processor. Basically, this Trinity processor is a supercomputer run by 3 AI cores that manage the Conduit's usage throughout all the other tech they've built, which we'll call artifices. Say the government wants to build a giant Gundam mech powered by the Conduit that could literally nuke Earth if they wanted to. Well, all the power governing that robot is allocated by the 3 cores of the Trinity processor, named Ontos, Logos, and Pneuma. Klaus and Galea's team found that you need a kind of sentient personality to activate the Conduit, so Logos acts as a male persona, Pneuma a female one, and Ontos acts kind of like an in-between non-binary persona that signs off on their decisions in order to activate the Conduit and use its power. Somehow, it's way more efficient than US Congress. To make a long story short, Society and technology gets jump-started into a futuristic state, stocked with space elevators, robots, and a blossoming space colonization project, but it also quickly turns into a dystopia with human rights starting to take a back seat and revolutionary fires start to burn. The Revolutionary Army, known as the Saviorites, which itself is manipulated by those who want to get the conduit for their own ends, eventually declares war on the government, and the world quickly starts burning down. At this point, our old buddy Klaus is pretty jaded by everything, and his own self-hatred and pessimism with the state of the world radicalize him into saying, alright, humanity sucks so much and is about to destroy the entire world, I'm just going to use the conduit to open a gateway to another universe so we can start over there. Despite Galea's pleas, Klaus begins his experiment, which immediately goes wrong since he just wished on the world's biggest monkey's paw. Instead of opening a portal or creating a new universe, it straight up splits the Earth into 2 different pocket universes, each complete with half of Klaus to rule over it. In the first, Klaus immediately regrets everything. He tries to use the artifices and the conduit technology to rebuild humanity in the world that he killed, taking a hands-off approach to godhood in fear of ruining everything again, or there being someone like him who will repeat his mistakes. In the second one, Klaus manifests as a kind of amnesiac demiurgic god, only knowing that he's the god of this universe that he just made, and has a personality made up of all the former Klaus's worst qualities, kinda like a Persona 4 shadow. Calling himself Zanza, and with power granted to him by the conduit through the displaced Ontos core, he creates a world in his image, with the only other god being a reborn Galea sharing his power set. Those are the worlds of Xenoblade 2 and 1 respectively, and lead to the events of those games. I'm not going to go over what happens in each game since hopefully you've played them, but to make a long story short, by the end of both games Klaus dies or is killed, passing on the pocket universes to their new inhabitants as the conduit's energy dissipates from them both. Xenoblade 3 happens when those pocket universes, now that Klaus and the conduit are gone, begin merging back into one universe. The 2 worlds manage to communicate through encroaching rifts in the tech that they build, and they create a massive machine called Origin that will use the remains of the Ontos core and the Trinity processor technology to hopefully safely merge the worlds without endangering any of their residents. This leads us to the events of Xenoblade 3, where afterwards the Earth submerged safely and the last shot is of a blue dot drifting closer and closer to the reformed planet. Now that we finished the Blade Trilogy timeline section, let's get into the parts of that game that could be picked up in Genesis, both based on the trailer and based on some loose ends that the trilogy leaves behind. That of course begs the question of whether this world we see being explored in the trailer for Genesis is that reformed Earth, which I personally heavily doubt it is. The biggest piece of evidence for this is the obvious hollow planet Dyson sphere thing that's going on. Now, I've heard some people say that this could just take place a long time after 3's ending, but even still, that would mean that Klaus's Earth would have had some kind of hollow Earth theory planet, which just doesn't make sense for the established lore in the world that we've seen multiple times. That being said, there has been nothing go against this world being in the same universe as that reborn Earth, although there is a lot of evidence and lore in X and Xenosaga pointing to it being kinda unnatural in that way. I'll get back to this topic from each perspective in those segments, but for now I'll just say that my leading theory is that this planet is, as many have theorized, some kind of artificial planet, similar to a Dyson sphere, with our typical Xeno sci-fi twist coming in similarly to 2's, but instead of climbing higher to a space station, we'll probably go underground to reach the actual surface of the world. It's even been pointed out how this mountain in the trailer looks suspiciously like the end of a giant spaceship, and there's a facility of some sort nearby, presumably blocking the entrance or secretly excavating it. The other big thing is that when the trailer was shown off at the Nintendo Direct, it was specifically said that all the footage shown was from very early in the game. With how every Xeno game ends in a drastically different place than when it starts in terms of stakes and scenery, it could even be that we get to the other side of this world maybe even around the halfway point after exploring the open world on the inside, although that's just speculation. On a funnier note, that also lends a lot to the joke everyone's been making about the school blowing up at the end of Chapter 1, since there's no way we are staying at one location the entire time in a Xeno game, especially since every starting area seems to explode in this series. The other big thing that this trailer has in terms of references to the trilogy is some suspicious imagery referencing the Trinity processor, specifically Numa's sword and Logo C purple energy. Of course, the first could just be a reference, and the second could just be our imaginations, but I wouldn't put it past the series to bring back Logos again, especially given there's precedent for it alongside a character arc wide open for tanking. That also makes me wonder about the future of the characters that we have from the Trinity processor, as we know from Future Redeemed that they're all alive and well on the remade Earth. with the only exception being Logos' status still being up in the air like we just said. I definitely expect to see more of them, if not in this game, then in whatever the game leads to, but given the high popularity of those characters alongside their heavy potential for future games, it's only a matter of time before we see them again. Now let's bring in some cosmology from Xenoblade X and start our spoiler section on that game as well. We've already talked about the idea of the upper and lower domain. However, the lower domain is also split into two parts. We have our physical universes that we've seen, but there's also a kind of spirit realm, referred to in Saga as the imaginary number domain, and in Xenoblade X as the Rift. Most of the typical spirit realm shenanigans apply to the Rift, being it's where souls go upon death and all that, but it also acts as a kind of in-between space for the multiverse. If the upper domain is like a big room, think of the Rift as like the water and fish tanks in that room that the individual fish swim around in. Origin in Xenoblade 3 uses the Trinity processor to tap into the Rift's power energies, and it's also what separates the mainline number trilogy universe from all the happenings in Xenoblade X. Within X, it's established that, quote-unquote, at the dawn of time, a highly advanced super civilization called the Samarians appeared from another plane. X's definitive edition dives deeper into ancient Samar, revealing them to be very similar to Klaus's Earth. In their original universe, they too found a conduit and used it to jumpstart their technology, getting even further than Klaus ever did. They seem to have mastered multiversal travel and established the Samar Federation, which itself may cover multiple universes. Samar's lead intellect and Klaus parallel was named Void, who not only created his own conduit processors known as the Ares cores, but also bioengineered his own subservient work-class species known as the Ganglion. We know Samar spread to many universes and over time had entire descendant species evolve from them, although it's unknown if this was a natural or engineered process similar to the Ganglion. In any case, Void, like Klaus, eventually flew too close to the sun with a conduit and ended up accidentally summoning forth beings known as the Ghosts. The Ghosts are also in Xenosaga under the name of the Gnosis, so we'll go more into specifics about them in that spoiler section, but for now what you need to know is that these things are major bad news. They come from the Rift itself, drawn to the energies given off by the conduit and its processors/emulators, and then they wreak havoc in their pursuit of them. When Void accidentally summons the Ghosts, the damage is immeasurable, and once the crisis is over, he's scapegoated for the entire incident. Void then gets imprisoned within an intellect-dampening prison that then gets sealed within the Rift itself, which is a punishment, in my opinion, far worse than death. Time passes, and while the Samar Federation continues to prosper, signs point to the Samarians themselves dying out or disappearing. Whether due to the Ghosts or other means, it's kind of unknown at this point. Other races rise up, but it seems that most, if not all of them, might have been descendants or, created themselves by ancient Samar, with humanity in particular bearing a high biological resemblance to them, possibly even being another direct evolution. In one universe, certain descendants of Samar have recreated Void's Ares mech through blueprints and live a peaceful life. That is, until something, heavily implied to be Klaus's experiment, reawakens Void from his slumber. Void begins telepathically inhabiting a mech known as the Vita, and rallies the Ganglion, who themselves were leading an uprising against the Samar Federation. Void attacks the planet with the Vita, seeking to reclaim the Ares, when all of a sudden, the Ghosts return and destroy the entire universe. The only survivors are the fleeing Void with the Ganglion, and a lone survivor of the planet named Elma, pilots the Ares to another universe which itself has Samarian descendants, in hopes of warning them of the incoming threat. This universe was the Xenoblade X universe, where Elma uses the technology of the Ares and its cores to help jumpstart an Earth similar to our own to create technology capable of defending itself and fleeing Earth with their own Earth-like colonization project, similar to the one that was on Klaus's Earth. When the Ganglion and the Ghosts both arrive again, ships depart Earth seeking to flee, but the only surviving ship that we know of is called the White Whale, which Elma defends alongside the current pilot of the Ares, a human named Al. The Ghosts destroy the universe yet again, shooting the fleeing humans and the Ganglion into yet another world where they crash land on a planet named Mira. During the scrape, Al and the Ares are thrust into the Rift itself during battle with Void's Vita, and the conduit processor running the Ares begins downloading mass amounts of data on the multiverse, even seeing the mainline Number Trilogy universe's events. During Al's travels, he also ends up on a kind of nirvana dimension that originates in the Xenosaga games, which is called the Beach of Nothingness. The beach kind of acts as like a transition point for souls fully entering the Rift, similar to Death Stranding's beaches if you played those games. During Al's time in the Rift, the plot of the original Xenoblade Chronicles X takes place on Mira, and his escape coincides with last year's Chapter 13 that was released with the Definitive Edition. By the end of that game, Elma, Al, and the party on Mira defeat Void and the Ganglion, fleeing Mira with the displaced residents of other universes before the ghosts return and fully annihilate Mira as well. The final shot is of the White Whale 2 flying towards a new planet and universe, hoping to find some new kind of safety. A question that people have often asked is if this is the same planet from the ending of Xenoblade 3, but really we can only wait and see if that's the case in Genesis or another future game. Shifting gears over to Genesis theories for X, what a lot of people have noticed about this new footage is that the only other time we've seen elf-eared people in the Xeno franchise has been either Samarians or direct descendants of Samar. So, are these Samarians? The way I see it, this could either be one of two things if they are Samarians. It could either be some kind of Samar outpost or refuge, but that really depends on if this is before or after the Void experiment. Because I do think in some way this will be connected to Samar given the emphasis on them in X Definitive Edition, but we know so little about them other than what was generally stated in that game that we don't really have anything really to go on. In my opinion, I think this will be set after the Void experiment, since that has already been well established, and it could even be an origin story depending on how well they tell the story. So this could be more of an origin story for Samar in terms of lore and how it'll connect going forward, but I don't think if it is about Samar, it'll connect directly to the number games or really X either based on those events of those games, but rather extended lore in the way that Xenoblade X Definitive Edition did it. Now, if you remember earlier, I said that there's a spaceship poking out of the side of the planet, or at least what we assume is, and I don't think this is the White Whale 2. In fact, I don't think the White Whale 2 will even be in this game at all, although I could be completely wrong. If this is some kind of lore origin point in the past, it could be where the White Whale 2 ends up at the end of Xenoblade X Definitive Edition, but I still don't think, I feel like if they include the White Whale 2 at all, this would just be X2, and this is instead very clearly not X2. So where the heck could this planet that we're looking at even be if we look at the lore of Xenoblade X? Now this could be another pocket dimension, similar to the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 and the beach, but I think it really depends on whether this is some kind of space station or something similar. And what lies outside the sphere, we have really nothing to go on other than speculation at this point. So it could be in a universe, it could be some kind of weird, just this planet like pocket dimension. But really, if we say it could be those, it could be anything at this point. Now, in terms of other unresolved plot points from X, we do now have another processor person being the Ares. Now, I talked about this in the numbered trilogy part, but now that we have another one, this brings us to a grand total of 5 processor people who have conduit power that hang around with our main characters. So I'm really wondering what role they're going to play going forward. We also know that the ghosts are drawn to conduit energy, so will this kind of be like how everybody's targeting Vision in Infinity War since he has one of the stones? Now, in any case, the ghosts aren't dealt with after XDE, and we do have a lot to talk about them with their role in Saga, so let's just discuss it there. That's the only other part of the Xeno series we have left to cover timeline-wise, so spoiler warning for that trilogy right now. To make it simple though, Xenosaga is all but confirmed to take place in the universe outside of the Earth Pocket Dimension shenanigans from the Blade Trilogy, and they have direct name-drop references to characters and aspects of Saga within the Xenoblade 3 DLC, so that makes this 99% likely to be the case, as their lore and universe lines up almost seamlessly. To wind the clocks back a bit, before Klaus Control-Alt-Deleted the Earth with the conduit, several spaceships departed the planet to colonize the universe. This was done under the influence of a being known as Wilhelm, who acts as the defender of the lower domain, and he seeks to prevent any kind of disaster that would destroy it. Wilhelm's current problem is that even after presenting Klaus's experiment for destroying all of humanity and the universe, continuous use of the conduit will summon forth the ghosts like we saw in Xenoblade X. The ghosts, or Gnosis as they're referred to in Saga, are actually souls from the Rift that have fully rejected becoming a part of the collective unconscious, instead allowing their fear to corrupt them and remain within the Rift unnaturally. If the ratio of Gnosis gets too high within a universe, they will utterly annihilate the lower domain completely. Now, this starts slowly, with Wilhelm's power able to prevent a couple catastrophes under his watch, but the problem is fully defined 4,000 years after the experiment. During a massive incident known as the Miltian Conflict, the conduit gets activated once again and summons forth the Gnosis on a massive scale. There's a heck of a lot that happens within the Xenosaga trilogy, but to make a long story short, Wilhelm's plan is to eternally reboot the universe to prevent it from getting to the point where the Gnosis overwhelm the world. But he also refuses to see an outcome where humanity is saved and defeats the Gnosis. He does this by using a machine called Zarathustra, which can commune with the conduit when activated by the avatars of a power called Anima and Animus, and will bring about the eternal recurrence. The main party of Xenosaga, of course, rejects this proposal in the end, and try to save the world by moving forward, and in defeating Wilhelm, they're told that the way to Earth has been reopened, and their answer to ultimately defeating the Gnosis lies there. Some of the team remain behind to rebuild the Galaxy Federation, which is that space civilization they all live in. Some go out to travel to Earth, and some are actually teleported there immediately, being the mostly destroyed android Cosmos, who drifts down to Earth once again, kinda like that blue light we saw in Xenoblade 3. Now, there's a big disagreement in the community right now as to whether that blue light is Cosmos or the White Whale 2, or even just, some random third thing, but once again, we really just have to wait to find out. Going into our theories and loose ends for Saga, we need to talk about Udu. Now, Udu is a wave existence inhabitant of the Upper Domain who takes a major interest in the Xenosaga and Blade Number Trilogy universe, and even materializes as a human child named Abel in order to better understand humanity. We've talked a lot about the Upper Domain being like a big room that everything else is contained in, so think of Udu like an actual person in that room reading the books within it. In the end of Saga 3, Udu/Abel makes some kind of wish for humanity, and disappears as well to Earth. This brings up actually a lot of unresolved plot points and lingering threads from that ending, which seem to overlap perfectly with the ending of the Numbered Blade trilogy, as well as potentially X. Now, first, what was Abel's wish? The simplest answer is just he opened the way to Earth, but it does seem to be a bit more important than that. Now, I desperately want to see Abel in the future as a character wanting to be more human as a god, and learning more and more about what that means. Personally, I like to see this kind of akin to the Philip K. Dick book called The Divine Invasion, which it's not his best work, but it has some amazing concepts, in that the capital G god himself is literally smuggled back to Earth in the future in a virgin birth on a spaceship, and then he grows up amnesiac and has an arc about figuring out who he is. It's an interesting book, it's not his best work, but I think that could be a really fun thing to pull from. One thing that the trailer for Genesis made very apparent is the return of the term anima, which was very important in Saga as the major force of life that could interact with the Zohar, or conduit. In Blade, there's something called ether, which seems to be the exact same thing. Now that we have the return of that term, though, it's more likely that we will see the return of the current avatars of Anima and Animus, that being Chaos and Nephilim, who were also teleported to Earth with Abel. Not only that, but we know that the Elsa is slowly making its way through the universe to Earth as well. And if they make contact with any other group of characters, being X or the Number Trilogy characters, that would mean a full crossover and major advancement of the overall plot. That being said, I don't know if this will happen in Genesis, but I do expect there to be some kind of forwarding of this plot without the actual finale of it, since, people would need a Saga port or remake on the Switch 2 for the full context first. Back in the Galaxy Federation, after the events of Xenosaga 3, the UMN network is completely down, but the Federation still stands. This is a major thing for the other Blade characters, having former Earth characters existing outside of Earth and possibly even seeking to reclaim it maybe. Heck, I could even see Xeno doing some kind of crusade arc with the big crossover if they do one. Not only that, but if Genesis does have to do with Samar as we've speculated, how would they react to this local government? You don't really have any kind of characterization for their way of rule, which is presumably what this game of Genesis is for. But what if this leads to some kind of conflict between the battered Galaxy Federation, the current form of Samarians, with Earth caught in the middle with this conduit? And of course, we've neglected to even mention yet the biggest elephant in the room, the impending threat of the Gnosis that is still going to wipe out the universe if left unchecked. Heck, they're still around in X on a multiversal scale, so we know how big of a threat they really are, even more than in just Saga. The ending of Saga 3 states that the answer to defeating the Gnosis and saving the universe lies on Earth, which we now know is returned after the events of the Blade trilogy. But what the heck is this answer now that we know what's going on there? Now, personally, I think it's the Trinity processor. The ancient machine turned sentient into many forms that can commune with the Zohar, and perhaps even help stem the tide of the Gnosis. Would this mean that the Gnosis arc will end with another experiment? Will Shulk, who is for all intents and purposes a reborn Klaus, have to redo the sins of the past in order to save everything? And how would Samar react to this? We know they're heavily against the Zohar and its processors and emulators, having banished Void and the Ares. So, would they be antagonistic in that way? Could Genesis be the fleshing out of one side of an incoming war over the ideas of how to survive? If the way I'm seeing this series unfold is correct, then we have the start of a great conflict ahead of us, but one where no one is truly against one another. Earth is home to a new surviving race of humans after Blade, who know nothing of the Ghost/Gnosis, but may very well hold the key to saving everything from them, whether they like it or not, as some kind of new holy land of Xeno. And X's displaced residents of multiple universes are searching as well for a new home, and might be welcomed on Earth and know of this impending threat. As well, they have the Ares with its mass data about the multiverse and Samar. Now, Saga's Elsa and the Galaxy Federation are also impending on Earth, seeking to do something about the Gnosis and possibly even return to Earth permanently. And the major ramifications of that are very powerful and unstable. Meanwhile, Genesis, as we've said, could be focusing on Samar, whether it be an origin or a current tale, and they hold the most power in the entire series that we know in terms of territory and technology. They may not be wholly antagonistic, but they may be seeking to shut off our current means of survival due to the immense risks, and they may not even be wrong for doing so. Now, knowing Xeno, the people we've come to know across the full series will, band together and try to save everyone, but how do you do that when the very idea is a rejection of goodwill altogether? Oh shit, Xeno is just becoming a cosmic version of the Trail series. Well, that's my theory anyway. But only time will tell if any of this even matters to Genesis in the first place when it launches in 2027. Hey, thanks for watching. This is another one of those half-scripted, half-unscripted videos. So there is a lot that I could have talked about here that I felt like just didn't have the place for it. If you want to see me do another video like this, please let me know. I adore this franchise and would kill for another chance at this. That being said, I will definitely be doing a lot more Genesis content closer to release and after release, so look forward to that. If you like this content, please subscribe and leave a like or anything like that. It really does help more than you know. Alright, and with that, everybody have a good one, and hope you enjoyed the video.